I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the torn edges of an envelope peeking out from Karen's trash bin. It was a split second, a flicker of white among the crumpled fast food wrappers and discarded receipts, but my gut clenched. I knew that envelope. It was the kind with the pre-printed address from my bank, the kind that only ever arrived in my mailbox. My name should have been on it, yet there it was, ripped open, shredded carelessly, as if its contents had never belonged to me. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just some mix-up. This wasn't a lost package. This was something deliberate. Something stolen. And if Karen had gone through the trouble of tearing it up before tossing it, then she knew exactly what she was doing. It wasn't the first time I had my suspicions about her. Karen, my next-door neighbor, had always been a little too interested in other people's business. The type of person who peeked through her blinds at all hours, who accidentally bumped into you just to ask intrusive questions. If she wasn't complaining about the neighborhood kids riding their bikes too close to her lawn, she was filing noise complaints about barking dogs that didn't exist. She had a sharp voice, a sharper glare, and a way of making you feel like you were always in the wrong, even when you weren't. But stealing my mail? That was a whole new level. I tried to brush it off at first. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just a mistake. But then it happened again. And again. Bank statements that never arrived. A package I had been tracking online, marked as delivered but nowhere to be found. Bills I had to call and request duplicates for. Each time, the same gnawing feeling in my stomach grew worse. I knew it was her. I just didn't have proof. Yet. Then came the final straw. It was a small package, nothing valuable, just a book I had ordered, but when I checked my mailbox that evening, it was empty. The tracking said it had been delivered that afternoon. Frustration bubbled inside me. I wasn't about to let this go. I decided to wait. Watch. Catch her in the act if I had to. And sure enough, the next morning, as I sat sipping my coffee by the window, I saw it. Karen, strutting out of her house like she owned the world, walking straight to my mailbox, glancing around like a guilty teenager before slipping her hand inside and pulling out an envelope. My envelope. I felt a surge of anger, my hands tightening around my coffee mug. That was it. No more wondering. No more doubts. She had crossed the line, and now, she was going to pay for it that I didn't react immediately. Storming out in a fit of rage wouldn't do me any favors. I needed to be smart about this. If Karen had been stealing my mail this whole time, confronting her without evidence would only give her the chance to deny everything. So I watched. I let her walk back into her house, pretending as if nothing had happened. But my mind was already working, piecing together a plan. I needed proof, undeniable proof that she was taking what didn't belong to her. A simple accusation wouldn't cut it, I needed something concrete. That night, I installed a small security camera near my mailbox, tucked carefully where it wouldn't be noticed. The next morning, I left home a little later than usual, giving Karen the chance to make her move. Sure enough, when I reviewed the footage later, there she was. The video showed her walking up to my mailbox, slipping her hand inside, and pulling out a few envelopes before casually tucking them under her arm and strolling back to her house like it was the most normal thing in the world. My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was exactly what I needed. Instead of confronting her right away, I decided to let it play out a little longer. Over the next few days, I collected more footage. Every time she took something, I recorded it. I started keeping track of what was missing and checking my informed delivery notifications to confirm exactly what had been stolen. At this point, I wasn't just angry, I was determined. She wasn't just inconveniencing me, she was committing a federal crime. And I wasn't about to let it slide. Then, as if stealing my mail wasn't enough, Karen escalated things. One afternoon, I received a notification that a package had been delivered. It was something important, a document I needed for work. When I got home, I checked my mailbox. Empty. I walked straight to her house, my fists clenched at my sides, my heart pounding. But I didn't knock. Instead, I stepped back, took a deep breath, and went to the side of her house where her garbage bins were lined up. If she had stolen my package, she might have tossed the evidence, just like she had with that torn envelope I'd seen earlier. Sure enough, buried beneath a pile of junk mail and crumpled newspapers, was the packaging from my missing delivery. My name, my address, all of it was still visible, slashed open carelessly. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just a neighbor being nosy or someone mistaking my mail for theirs. This was theft, pure and simple. And she didn't even have the decency to hide it properly. I snapped a few pictures of the torn packaging, my hands shaking with rage. I had enough proof now. More than enough. The videos, the missing items, the discarded packaging, she had been caught red-handed. The only question left was how I was going to handle it. I could go straight to the police, file a report, let them deal with it. Or I could make sure Karen knew exactly how badly she had messed up before the authorities got involved. Either way, she wasn't getting away with this. Not this time that I knew I had to act fast. Every second that passed gave Karen more time to cover her tracks, more opportunities to deny, manipulate, or twist the truth like she always did. But this time, she had no way out. I had her on camera, caught in the act, and there was no denying the evidence I had collected. I could have marched over there, banged on her door, and thrown the pictures in her face, but that wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, to know that she wasn't just playing petty neighbor games, she had committed a crime, and she was about to face real consequences. Instead of going straight to her, I decided to hit her where it hurt. First, I printed out the clearest still images from my footage, highlighting the exact moments she reached into my mailbox and stole my mail. Then, I made copies of the ripped-up packaging with my name still visible. I placed everything inside a large envelope, along with a short, typed note that read, "Stealing mail is a federal offense. This is your one chance to return everything before I take this to the authorities." No threats, no explanations, just cold, hard reality. Then, I sealed the envelope and slipped it under her front door. The waiting was the hardest part. I sat by my window, pretending to scroll through my phone, but my eyes were locked on her house. It took about an hour before I saw movement. The moment she opened the door and picked up the envelope, her entire posture changed. At first, she hesitated, flipping it over in her hands as if deciding whether to open it. But curiosity got the best of her. The second she saw what was inside, her head snapped up, eyes darting around as if she expected someone to be watching. Her face twisted in anger, then panic. She rushed back inside and slammed the door shut. Minutes passed. Then, my doorbell rang. I let her wait. I wanted her to feel the uncertainty, to sweat a little before I gave her the satisfaction of an answer. After a long pause, I finally got up and opened the door. There she was, standing stiffly on my porch, trying to arrange her face into something neutral, but failing miserably. Her eyes flicked over my shoulder, probably checking if I had anyone with me, but I didn't say a word. I just waited. She cleared her throat, shifting uncomfortably. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding, she said, her voice strained, her fake innocence barely holding together. I didn't react. I just tilted my head slightly, as if waiting for her to continue, watching as she struggled under the weight of her own guilt. She must have realized I wasn't going to make this easy for her, because she exhaled sharply and tried again. Maybe some of your mail ended up in my box by mistake, she said, her tone shifting to something vaguely accusatory, as if she was trying to pin this on me. You know how these postal workers are, always mixing things up. I was just holding onto it, meant to return it, but I got busy. Busy? Busy ripping open my mail, reading my private information, throwing out what she didn't need? My anger burned beneath my skin, but I kept my voice steady. I told her I had video proof, that this wasn't some mix-up, and that if she wanted to make this right, she had exactly 1 hour to return everything she had taken. No excuses. No lies. Just bring it all back, or I was going to the police. She paled at that. Her fingers twitched at her sides like she wanted to argue, but she must have seen something in my face that told her this was the end of the road. Without another word, she turned sharply on her heel and marched back to her house. I didn't know if she would actually follow through, but at this point, I didn't care. If she thought she could weasel her way out of this with half-baked excuses, she was in for a rude awakening. Whether she returned my stolen mail or not, I had already made my decision. She wasn't walking away from this. Not this time that I sat by the window, watching the minutes tick by, my stomach coiled with anticipation. Karen had exactly 1 hour to do the right thing, but I wasn't naive enough to believe she would. People like her didn't admit fault, didn't take accountability. They twisted reality until they were the victim, until they convinced themselves that their actions were justified. And Karen? She was the queen of self-righteousness. If she returned my mail, it wouldn't be because she felt guilty, it would be because she thought it would save her from something worse. But I wasn't giving her an easy way out. Whether she complied or not, I was ready. The first 30 minutes passed in silence. No movement from her house, no sign of any mail appearing at my doorstep. I expected her to at least come up with a half-baked excuse, some weak attempt at damage control, but nothing. Then, with 10 minutes left, her front door creaked open. I watched as she stepped outside, holding a small plastic grocery bag in one hand, looking over her shoulder before scurrying toward my porch like a thief in the night. I didn't move, didn't acknowledge her. She dropped the bag by my door and practically sprinted back to her house, slamming the door behind her. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. Coward. I waited a few moments before retrieving the bag, and sure enough, inside was a crumpled mess of stolen letters, wrinkled envelopes, and open packages. Some of them were still sealed, others looked like they had been read and hastily stuffed back together. My name was on every single one of them. She hadn't even bothered to deny it. I sifted through the pile, checking what had been returned. My missing bank statements were there, my work documents, even a few pieces of random junk mail she had likely taken just to make it seem like it had been a mistake. But one thing was missing, the package I had seen her take the other day. The one with my important work documents. Of course. She wasn't giving back everything. She wanted to see how much she could still get away with. That was her second mistake. The first was ever stealing from me in the first place. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone and called the non-emergency police line. I explained the situation, the repeated mail theft, the security footage, and the fact that I had just received some of my stolen items back, but not all of them. The dispatcher took my report seriously. Mail theft wasn't just petty neighbor drama, it was a federal offense, and with the proof I had, they weren't about to brush it off. Within 20 minutes, a police cruiser pulled up in front of my house. My heart pounded as I watched 2 officers step out, their expressions unreadable. I met them outside, handing over the bag of stolen mail and the printed photos from my security footage. I explained everything, sticking to the facts, keeping my tone calm and measured. The officers exchanged a look before nodding, one of them flipping through the evidence while the other jotted down notes. "She's still holding on to at least one of my packages," I added, my voice firm. "I want it back." The officer who had been reviewing the photos exhaled sharply and shook his head. "This is more than enough to move forward with an investigation," he said. "We'll talk to her." I followed them as they made their way to Karen's house. A part of me almost felt bad for her, almost. But then I remembered all the times I had gone to my mailbox expecting an important document, only to find it missing. All the frustration, the wasted time, the quiet violation of my privacy. She had brought this on herself. The officers knocked on her door, firm and authoritative. It took a minute before she answered, and when she did, she looked like she had just seen a ghost. Her eyes darted between me and the officers, her hands clutching the edge of the doorframe. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice tight. "We received a report regarding stolen mail," the officer said, his voice steady. "We need to talk." Karen's face twisted into something that was supposed to resemble shock. "Stolen? Oh no, there's been a huge misunderstanding." "We've seen the footage," the officer interrupted, holding up the photos I had printed. "We know you've been taking mail that doesn't belong to you." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Her face went through a series of micro-expressions: denial, panic, anger, and finally, something closer to desperation. "I was just trying to make sure it got to the right person," she blurted. "Sometimes the mail gets mixed up, and You ripped open his packages," the officer pointed out, unimpressed. "You threw out his letters. That's not looking after misplaced mail. That's theft." Karen's breath hitched. She glanced at me, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. She knew there was no way out of this. "It was a mistake," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "A stupid mistake." The officers didn't look convinced. "Do you still have any of his property in your possession?" She hesitated. That was all they needed. One of the officers squared his shoulders. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you again. Do you still have any of his property?" Karen swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. Then, without a word, she turned and disappeared into her house. A few moments later, she reappeared, holding my missing package in her shaking hands. She didn't meet my eyes as she handed it over to the officer, her face pale. The officer turned to me, confirming my name and address before handing me the package. I took it carefully, my fingers pressing into the creases of the cardboard. It was finally back in my hands. The weight of it, both literal and metaphorical, sent a wave of satisfaction through me. But this wasn't over yet. The officers weren't done with her. One of them pulled out a notepad. "We'll be filing a report for mail theft. You may be facing criminal charges, ma'am." Karen sucked in a sharp breath. "Wait, what?" "No, please. You've committed a federal crime," the officer continued. "You need to understand how serious this is." Her lips trembled, her entire posture shrinking. For the first time, the full reality of what she had done seemed to hit her. She wasn't just dealing with an angry neighbor anymore. She was dealing with law enforcement, with legal consequences, with something far bigger than her usual neighborhood drama. She had overplayed her hand, and now, she was paying the price. The officers finished taking her statement before warning her not to make any further contact with me. When they finally left, she stood frozen on her doorstep, staring at me with something that looked like disbelief. I didn't say anything. I just gave her a small, knowing nod before turning back toward my house. Justice had finally caught up with Karen. But this was only the beginning of what was coming for her. The days that followed were quiet, almost unsettlingly so. Karen, who once thrived on causing problems, had vanished into the background. No more passive-aggressive comments, no more nosy stares from her window, no more fake smiles that barely concealed her contempt. It was as if she had finally realized she had no power left to wield. I should have felt relieved, maybe even satisfied, but I knew this wasn't over. Consequences had a way of catching up, and for Karen, they were only beginning to unfold. A few days later, an official-looking envelope arrived in my mailbox. The irony wasn't lost on me. This time, it was addressed to me, untouched, exactly as it should have been. I tore it open and scanned the document inside. It was a notice from the police department. Karen had been formally charged with mail theft, and while it wasn't a felony due to the lower value of the stolen items, she was still facing misdemeanor charges, a hefty fine, and the possibility of probation. A part of me wondered if she had expected to walk away unscathed, if she had convinced herself that this would all blow over like her previous misdeeds. But this wasn't some neighborhood squabble. This was the law, and the law didn't bend for people like Karen. The next time I saw her, it was by accident. I was taking my trash out when I noticed her standing by her driveway, talking in hushed, frantic whispers to another neighbor. Her face was pale, her shoulders hunched like a scolded child. She glanced in my direction, and for the first time since this ordeal began, she looked away first. No glare, no defiance, just quiet, hollow defeat. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the fallout. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood, as it always did. People who had once tolerated Karen's antics now whispered about how she had finally pushed things too far. It was strange, watching the shift in dynamic. The same people who used to turn a blind eye to her behavior now treated her like an outsider. Nobody wanted to be associated with someone who had been caught committing a crime, and for the first time, Karen had to experience what it felt like to be on the other end of scrutiny. Then came the final blow. A few weeks later, a moving truck pulled up in front of her house. I watched from my porch as she and her husband carried box after box into the vehicle, their movements rushed, tense, like they couldn't get out of here fast enough. I wasn't sure if she was leaving by choice or if the weight of her embarrassment had made staying unbearable, but either way, it didn't matter. She was gone by the end of the day, the house sitting empty like a quiet reminder of everything that had unfolded. I never saw her again. The neighborhood felt lighter without her, like an invisible storm cloud had finally lifted. My mail arrived on time, untouched. My packages sat safely on my doorstep, exactly where they were supposed to be. Life moved forward, simple and uninterrupted, just the way it should have been all along. And Karen? Well, wherever she was now, I hoped she had finally learned that some lines weren't meant to be crossed.